French philosopher Paul Ricoeur on time and narrative, quote, "The art of storytelling places narrative in time. The art of storytelling is not so much a way of reflecting on time as a way of taking it for granted." But why are we taking time for granted in art? What if there was a medium, a way to integrate time into the story, to make it integral? What would that story look like? Now, before diving into this complex and vast world of ARGs, I wanted to build a timeline, ironically, of non-linear storytelling to see how we got to this point. So if you're only here for the ARGs, there are going to be timestamps at the bottom, but I feel that the vocabulary used will end up serving us later down the road. And finally, as you can see at the bottom here, it does say that this video contains a cognito hazard, specifically in part 7, which covers creepypastas, but if you don't know what a cognito hazard is, don't Google it. To define terms like narrative and story, I'm going to look to the Cambridge Introduction to Narrative. Narrative can be thought of as the representation of an event being a plot point within the story, and the story being something that can be delivered by the narrative. In other words, narrative conveys story. So basically, the story is what happens and the narrative is how you show what happened. These terms are obviously codependent, and so that's why I feel that it has gotten to a point where they are used interchangeably. But in order to fully dive into the way that these stories unfold narratively, we have to separate these two ideas. Let's start by taking a look at the article Visualizing Nonlinear Narratives with Story Curves. While this can look pretty intimidating, we're going to start off with a pretty straightforward narrative, which is Fight Club. Now, as you can see here, Fight Club is almost an entirely linear story, meaning that it's told from beginning to end, in an almost exact way, telling the events one after another, except right at the beginning here, where it begins in the immediate resolution, aka the end of the movie. If you remember, the very start of the movie is Tyler Durden sticking a down the mouth of the narrator, so I mean, it's a lot of events have happened to get to that point. Now, to look at a slightly more complex narrative, we're gonna go with Reservoir Dogs. The story of Reservoir Dogs is as follows. Freddy is a cop who is sent on an undercover mission with 6 other men to perform a heist. The heist goes horribly wrong and the men figure out that there is a rat among them. The rest of the movie takes place trying to figure out which of the 6 men is in fact the rat. Now, this story can certainly stand on its own merit, but what really makes Reservoir Dogs is the narrative, because we are not told until about halfway in the story that Freddy is the cop. We've already made an emotional connection to all of these characters by the time we find this crucial piece of information out. And there, where I was describing the story from beginning to end, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like Reservoir Dogs, because the narrative and the way that it is presented completely can change a story, can change how you interpret a story. If I were to ask you what the story of Reservoir Dogs is, you'd probably give me a mixture of the story and the narrative. These are two inseparable ideas, but a story without a narrative is never heard, never told, never observed, and a narrative cannot exist without a story. That's why I feel that it is so important to analyze some of these a little bit more basic non-linear stories compared to what we're going to get into. But I did really quickly want to share with this article, this is the visual representation for Christopher Nolan's Memento, which is absolutely insane.
How happy is the blameless vessel's lot, the world forgetting by the world forgot. Eternal sunshine of a spotless mind, each prayer accepted, and each wish resigned.
Books, movies, TV show, almost all media that we consume has a beginning and an end. There is an order to it. All of the graphs we were just talking about examine narrative order, and therefore they can only exist when the movie has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'm gonna draw 3 different arcs of this movie, starting with the character's emotional arc. These characters are stuck in a cycle. They are bound to meet, fall in love, erase each other in their memories, and then meet again. It goes in a constant circle, these two. In fact, the original ending of the movie had an 80-year-old Clementine going in to erase Joel from her memory once again. They have been doing this their whole life. However, these characters experience time linearly, meaning they meet, they fall in love, they erase each other of their memory, they meet, they fall in love, and they erase each other of their memory. Time in this instance does not bend or shift with the emotions of Joel and Clementine. The movie combines these two by presenting the narrative in a nonlinear way. In fact, here is the same article, Visualizing Nonlinear Narratives with Story Curves, but this is their representation of Eternal Sunshine, and you can see it's a fair bit more complicated than the other ones that we were looking at. Similar to Fight Club, the story starts at the beginning, at the media resolution, where they meet, and we assume that this is the first time that they meet, and then they go on, erase each other of their memories, only for us to discover that this is not, in fact, their first time meeting. The next example I wanted to look at is Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, which is maybe one of my favorite stories of all time. This story is about a linguist whose linear understanding of time disintegrates as she starts to communicate with an alien species. If it sounds familiar, that's because this novella was the inspiration behind 2016's Arrival. Both of these projects are incredible, and in fact, I believe that Arrival should be taught in film school as a masterclass in how to do an adaptation. Because while they both have the same story, the narrative is presented completely differently. Much like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Arrival uses common film tropes in order to manipulate the audience. For example, we see multiple flashbacks in the first bits of the movie of the main character with her daughter, only for her to ask, "Who is this child?" revealing that the flashbacks, or what we thought were flashbacks, were actually flash forwards, and that her understanding of time is changing. On the other hand, in the book, it is clear from the beginning that our main character is experiencing time non-sequentially. There's hints from page 1, but it definitively says on page 6 that her daughter dies, which is held off from people in the movie for a long time. One brilliant thing about the book is that it appears to be written grammatically incorrectly. Just like our main character, the tenses jump from past to present to future all the time. There's a moment in the book where she remarks that her adult daughter will become her infant daughter, rather than the infant becoming the adult. Towards the end of the book, there are sentences that read, "I remember what it'll be like watching you when you are a day old." The story does not rely on twists or confusions to drive the plot forward. Instead, it paints a very clear picture of our narrator and her life, and how her actions will impact her and her daughter, eventually leading to her death. And yet, our main character creates and recreates these things knowing how it'll end. But this is not described as something that is constraining in any way. On the contrary, it opens the main character's mind to understand her life better. There is a beautiful sequence on page 48 where the main character is buying a wooden salad bowl with her husband, and her mind then jumps to when her daughter is about 3 years old, and that same wooden salad bowl falls on her head, which results in her having to be rushed to the hospital. But the main character describes the action of going to get the bowl, going to buy the bowl, as one in the same as the action of her trying to stop that bowl from falling on her daughter's head. I reached out and took the bowl from the shelf. The motion didn't feel like something I was forced to do. Instead, it seemed just as urgent as rushing to catch the bowl when it falls on you. An instinct I felt right in following. Which might be one of the most beautiful passages of all literature. To gain more insight into the narrator's mindset, Story of Your Life employs Fermat's theorem of least time, which is the first mathematical and scientific equation that the aliens are able to repeat back to the scientists within the book. So let's say that we have a light source here, and it needs to end at this point. But it is traveling through a body of water. This is water and this is going to be air. There are 3 different ways that the light can travel from the source to the end goal. The first one is the most direct way, a straight line right from source to output. You can have the way with the least amount of water, the substance with which the light moves slowly through, where you go all the way as far as you can and then straight down. So somewhere in between, the path of least distance and the path of least water is our fastest route. And this is the route that the light will take every single time. Every single time light moves, it moves in the quickest way to the end. Therefore, light needs to know its end, its output, before leaving the source. This mirrors our main character, but also offers an explanation as to why she does not feel constrained by this universe. Because even though she can see the end goal, she knows where the output is, she knows her daughter's going to die, she can still pick the fastest or the truest route to these things. Now we're gonna map out the same arcs that we did with Eternal Sunshine, starting with the emotional arc, which is surprisingly linear. We start with a linear understanding of time, and then we meet our aliens. Once we meet our aliens, the perception of time completely distorts and shifts. And finally, we have our character surrendering, not just to time, but to love. To picking her daughter, choosing to have her daughter and raise her, knowing that she's going to die. And again, in contrast to Joel and Clementine, our main character starts to experience time non-linearly. So it might start with a straight line and very quickly delve into something else, something that we cannot even begin to comprehend. And just like Eternal Sunshine, it combines these 2 emotions as well as time into a narrative structure. But the same way we had that graph, that really nice one for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I'm not going to do that for A Story of Your Life because I don't want to. It would take too long, and I have so much of this video essay left to do. But it would be a pretty similar structure to Eternal Sunshine because we have a root story, the linguist decoding the language, intercut with her personal life, the different emotional arcs, jumping around in time, specifically revolving around her daughter. However, the big difference is, of course, that our narrator has an elevated understanding of time. Time hugely affects how we tell stories because we tell them beginning, middle to end. That's how we perceive them. It's almost impossible to think of a different way to perceive time or a different way to tell stories. But Story of Your Life does that brilliantly. And while both stories end in the characters surrendering to time and to love and to fate, Story of Your Life does not take time for granted at all. In fact, the complete opposite. The main character is a vessel for time. It lives in time. However, I keep finding that in every non-linear story that I analyze, including those 2 examples, they all follow the hero's journey, which is an extremely linear archetype. I mean, I remember thinking at the beginning of my research on all of this that you have all of these amazing stories, intricate ways of telling stories. You deepen your understanding of narrative, but you don't deepen your understanding of how to tell a story because you're shoving it into a format that makes sense to people that we've seen before. So what the fuck is so innovative about nonlinear storytelling? Charlie Kaufman, the writer of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, actually describes this concept in an interview called Charlie Kaufman on Why Film is Dead.
That there's a kind of a very, very kind of one root way of making movies in this culture. And that there seems to be sort of this mindset that it has to be this one thing, and this is the structure of it, and this is what has to happen to the characters, and I think that there's like in anything, like in any art form, there's the world opens up when you take that away, and you allow yourself to kind of think in a kind of a larger and more creative way about the process. So it's not movies that I'm questioning. It's what's being done with movies. The audience relation to a movie doesn't affect the movie. The movie's already set in stone, you know?
And just because something is set in stone does not make it a bad thing. Eternal Sunshine is one of my favorite movies of all time. But I think what Kaufman is speaking to here is the hero's journey. Describing a want for somebody, anybody, to take the horse by the reins and to actually create something intricate, something we haven't seen before. Film is dead because it has bored itself entirely. Film is dead because there is no way of escaping the hero's journey, even in a cutting-edge, non-linear film like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. However, since Eternal Sunshine, there has been many attempts by streaming services to start to move movies in a new direction, something more akin to a video game. Everybody here should already be familiar with choose your own adventure stories, whether it be a book, a movie, or a game which has multiple different endings, giving the audience a little bit of agency over where the story goes. These stories are non-linear by nature, since you don't read the book from the first page to the last page, you jump around. It requires non-linearity in order to traverse. And in the recent years, there's been less choose your own adventure books, and it's been shifting more towards video games and movies, which is a medium much better suited for interactive storytelling. So, we're talking about non-linear movies, we're getting to choose your own adventure. We have to start, obviously, with Bandersnatch. The movie follows a creative trying to turn a choose your own adventure book into a video game, and he is slowly overwhelmed and taken over by the idea of free will and choice. Bandersnatch has multiple different endings, as well as fake endings, which would probably be better described as incomplete paths. I have a graph here. It might be a bit difficult to see, but there are multiple points where you will get to an ending and Netflix will then prompt you to go back and redo a decision that led you to that ending, creating a different ending for you, forcing you through multiple plot lines within Bandersnatch. This would not have been possible if it wasn't online. Netflix has the power to popularize choose your own adventure stories, but this isn't what makes Bandersnatch stand out. While all choose your own adventure stories are structurally non-linear, the audience's perception, the way that the story unfolds for the individual, is often linear. An event will happen which will prompt you to make a choice which will lead to the next event, and so on until the story reaches its conclusion. However, Bandersnatch forces you to go back and to reach multiple different endings, not multiple false endings, multiple complete endings of the story. In order to understand Bandersnatch, you have to retrace and recreate your steps. You have to explore more than one timeline of events. The credits won't even roll until you've explored multiple story options. I remember my mom did not like this movie so much, and upon further examination, I found that she had only gotten to one ending. Her entire time watching Bandersnatch was maybe half an hour long. And so we rewatched the movie, exploring multiple different endings, and it's just so incredible. You get just as confused as the main character, who is like probably experiencing some sort of paranoid delusions, but you're right along there with him because you don't know, did I kill them in this plotline? Did I bury them? Did I chop them up into little pieces? This symbol comes up multiple times in Bandersnatch, and it represents the crossroads between a decision and the outcome. This also symbolizes the audience making a choice for the main character, which is actually why this symbol ends up haunting him, because it is a constant reminder throughout the movie that he does not actually have agency or control over his actions. This is actually how he makes his video game. In the ending where he finishes the video game, he uses this to ensure that no matter what choice the audience makes, they will actually go back to the same path, creating only the illusion of choice. He knows that too much choice will overwhelm not just the audience, but the creative. This is also how the Bandersnatch movie operates. Many choices lead to the same outcome. This goes for all traditional choose-your-own-adventure stories. They're not actually about choice. They're so planned out that all they can really offer the audience is a predetermined path disguised as a decision. The next project I want to talk about is Sleep No More, which is an interactive play in which the audience actively decides what they experience. Sleep No More breaks the theatrical line, which is a theoretical line between the audience and the performers. This is usually marked by the end of the stage and the beginning of the seats. But however, in Sleep No More, there is no line. It is completely immersive. When I had the privilege of going, it was so much more immersive than I ever expected. There were characters making eye contact with me. You could get inches away from their face. They could touch you. Whether or not they were touching me because I was in their way is irrelevant. The story of Sleep No More is an interpretation of Back-Meth, where each character's story arc kind of runs in a loop, I believe, about 3 times per performance, so that the audience members can experience multiple different plot points. As an audience member, you are free to run around the space, follow actors, or rummage through their rooms, opening drawers, picking up props, reading entire books. There is so much to experience within Sleep No More that it is impossible to experience it in 1 viewing, in 3 viewings. It is impossible. The creators have structured the play in this way to give each audience member a completely unique and individual experience. There is a disgusting and almost pathological amount of details in Sleep No More. In fact, Felix Barrett, the creative director, once described the job of a prop or scenic detailist, who after every show will go and make sure that all of the props are in working order. But after every show, they will also add new Easter eggs and different things to be discovered. The example that he used, or one of the examples, was them taking off a photo from the wall and carving a message into the back of the frame. I'm sorry? And every prop, it doesn't just add to the environment of Sleep No More, it also adds to the story, which means that this is an expansive and ever-growing story. This makes the narrative of Sleep No More exceptionally unique because it continues to expand and grow. It has no discernible end. In this case, the end of the story wouldn't be the finale or the furthest event chronologically. The end of the play is actually the cap of what the audience is able to discover. And with the prop detailing job, there are constantly being new plot points added to the story. Therefore, this story will not end until the production ends. And production just ended in New York, but they opened up in Shanghai and in Seoul. So it's still being added to across the world. Now, when we talk about the shape of Sleep No More, it's a little bit more complicated than discerning the shape of something like Bandersnatch. For one, it's a theater show, so it's just physically more difficult to record and show all of the plot points within the story. Second, many of the points of the story, like the 6th floor, the one-on-one experiences, or the painting just mentioned, the carving in the painting just mentioned, they are littered everywhere in the show. So I believe that there has to be different props, plot points that no one has discovered yet. I don't believe that there actually is a Bible, I don't believe that there is one person that understands the show in its entirety, even Felix Barrett. They've been very open about how collaborative Punch Drunk really is, and how the choreography, the set, the lighting, the scent, the smell of each room all inform each other and all add to the story. So I don't think that there is one way to map out this story. It's impossible. It's an impossible challenge. So instead of driving myself absolutely insane by constructing the shape of the whole story, we're going to map out bits of the story that we do know. On one side, we have Back-Meth, its storyline and its characters, and on the other side, we have the Hitchcock film Rebecca, which also greatly inspired Sleep No More. Now, they did have to change the names due to copyright, but they took the names from the real-life Paisley witch trials. Now, there are more characters in both of these plot lines, but For what we're going to be discussing here today, I just did the ones that are necessary. For the most part, these two stories take place separately from one another, but they do inform each other both in the performance and in the creation process. For example, the three witches in Sleep No More's version of Bacmeth are the boy witch, the sexy witch, and the bald witch. And the bald witch actually comes from Agnes Sampson, who was a real person in the Paisley witch trials, who was tortured, shaven, and burnt at the stake. In fact, Agnes is a character within Sleep No More, and she is actually one of the big reasons of the crossover between these two stories. In Sleep No More, Malcolm, son of Duncan, owns a detective agency, and as well as him being very invested in who killed his father, he is also invested in one of the main plot lines of the Rebecca Hitchcock story, which is Agnes's missing sister. Another extremely vital performer in Sleep No More is Hecate, who is taken from Greek mythology, the goddess of magic. This version of Bacmeth, Lady Bacmeth and Hecate are the ones who convince him to go and kill Duncan. Hecate has an invested interest in ensuring fate, and her character is actually the one who resets the performances every night. By mapping this out, although very messy, sorry, I thought I would have a bigger whiteboard, but through mapping this out, we can see it creates almost a web-like structure where each part is leaning and informing the other. To make it a bit easier to visualize, I'm going to include the graphic that I made while writing right here. Hopefully this clarifies what I mean by a web-like structure a little bit more. A final point I want to make about Sleep No More is why you would not be able to use the tree-like Bandersnatch method in order to map it out. One of the biggest reasons behind this is that there are multiple things happening simultaneously in Sleep No More. The Bandersnatch symbol is a representation of cause and effect, but Sleep No More does not run on cause and effect. It is ran by the audience, a real choose-your-own-adventure. Both Bandersnatch and Sleep No More exist on opposite ends of the choose-your-own-adventure spectrum. Both of these stories can elevate our understanding of how these choose-your-own-adventure stories can go. On Sleep No More's side, we have a typical narrative structure in which the story that the audience sees is a small portion of the overall story, but the story itself is not typical in the sense that it continues to grow and expand with every passing performance. That is not something that you can get in a book or a movie. Go back to the set in stone idea from Kaufman. And on the other hand, Bandersnatch has a typical choose-your-own-adventure story, but the narrative is not typical. The narrative demands to be consumed in its entirety. Choose-your-own-adventure stories act very differently from typical media. There is non-linearity inherent in these stories. However, both Bandersnatch and Sleep No More are still confined to linear mediums. Eventually, the credits have to roll on Bandersnatch. Eventually, there has to be a final performance of Sleep No More. There will come a day where these stories end. A beginning, a middle, and an end. So I find myself falling back into the same problem we had in the last section with the hero's journey, that these mediums are still linear, trying to hold non-linear stories. If only there was a medium so chaotic, so uncontrollable and wild, a borderless place where art can traverse labyrinths and creatives can upload their work without any issues or borders. Unfortunately, nothing like this exists, and this is the end of the essay. Video games have long been an underappreciated art form, despite them being at the forefront of technological and artistic innovations. Thankfully, I don't think that the opinion that video games aren't art is as popular as it was a few years ago. I think most people have accepted that video games are in fact high art. Now, I've never been a big video gamer. I had a 3DS when I was a kid, and I played Art Academy and Moshi Monsters Zoo Mushlings. And Minecraft, but that's really about it for my video game knowledge. I've started to get into them again recently because of Jacob Geller's amazing video essays. I wanted to take a moment to brag and say that I have his book, which is his annotated video essays, and I don't know, I'm so fucking nerdy, but this is like I feel like he made this just for me. But even with Jacob Geller, I still don't tend to download and play the game itself. I just watch people discussing it. And therefore, I don't think I am the best person to talk about the connection between video games to ARGs. However, I do want to give them their due credit, which is probably a lot more than I even realize. Video games and their non-linear structure paved the way and created a foundation for what would eventually become ARGs. And there are two main categories that non-linear games tend to fall into, and that is open world and sandbox. Open world games usually involve a physical map, and in that map there will be multiple different plot points scattered, and the audience is able to traverse and move through this world at their own free will and at their own pace. Games like Skyrim and Red Dead Redemption would go into this category. However, Sandbox similarly also has a physical map and plot points. But the plot points in the story is not the main purpose of these games. It is secondary to the player innovation and creativity. Games like Terraria and Minecraft are perfect examples of this, because I don't think there has ever been a time where I, or anyone else, has played Minecraft, gone through the steps, defeated the Ender Dragon, and then just delete the world. That doesn't happen. Even though the credits roll, we continue to play. So I just wanted to come on here and make that disclaimer, as well as say that if there are any video games you guys know that have absurd narrative structures, please share them with me. Comment, email, I don't care how, just please share them with me.
As we pull back the covers of our reality and find that in fact, indeed, chaos is a far more accurate picture of what we are and how we live.
To state the obvious, the internet has changed everything. And public access to the internet is only about 30 years old, but it has changed the way that we communicate and the way that we think. And therefore it is changing art. And the internet is growing exponentially. That is why it is so difficult to keep track of some of these things. Information becomes outdated in the blink of an eye. You know, I had social media when I was about 12. I got an Instagram account, and I've been watching YouTube ever since the creation of the website. I grew up on the internet, and I can understand the trends and intricacies more than people just a few years older than me can. And likewise, my brothers, who are just a few years younger than me, understand way more than I do. Please now go and watch CJ the X's video essay on Bo Burnham versus Jeffrey Bezos. It is an incredible examination of how social media has changed us, but it's also, I think, the only video essay that has made me cry. It is genuinely beautiful. CJ's work is unmatched. They are so talented. So I wouldn't feel right not recommending that video. I talked about Bandersnatch earlier in this video, but Netflix has continued to integrate new ways of telling stories into their platform. They've been buying multiple different video games, like the story mode. No, that's not what it's called, like the storyboard game. And in 2023, when I started writing this essay, they released a show called Kaleidoscope, which could be watched in any order. However, you do have to watch the episode titled White last, but isn't that just brilliant? I can't believe I'm praising Netflix for making something so new and so original, and certainly not a watered-down version of Mark Seporda's Composition 1 or the cut-up method from Burroughs. Now, could we have done Bandersnatch and Kaleidoscope in a book? Sure, but Netflix has a major role in popularizing these narratives. So as much lip as I give it, I do have to thank it for bringing these types of projects into a mainstream. Now, could Bandersnatch and Kaleidoscope have been a book? Sure, but Netflix has a major role in popularizing these non-linear and more convoluted ways of telling stories. And Netflix is so mainstream, of course it's going to be baby steps. So as much lip as I am giving Netflix and will continue to give Netflix, I have to say that they are doing work in popularizing these kind of narratives. However, popularization is not creation, and I want to talk about the people who pioneered this. So we're going to go to one of the best book of essays I have ever read, Cybertext. Espen J. Arseth's groundbreaking book of essays, Cybertext, explains perfectly why we need to take these narratives seriously. He defines cybertext as ergodic literature, where active participation from the audience is required in order to traverse the text. A great example of this is the I Ching, which is a Chinese divination book that was created around 9th century BCE. First things first, you're going to ask the book a question, and then you are going to create your hexagrams. There are a few different ways to find your hexagrams, but I'll be showing the 3-coin method. You toss your 3 coins and count them. Heads representing yang equals 3, and tails representing yin equals 2. The total number will give you a line. Repeat this process 6 more times, drawing your lines from the bottom up. The top 3 lines represent your upper triagram, and the bottom 3 lines represent your lower triagram. Then open the I Ching to the first page where there is a table of symbols: water, mountain, earth, wind, thunder, fire, lake, and heaven. Your triagrams will represent one of these symbols. This will guide you to the page in which to gain insight into your question. Now, what makes the I Ching different from Choose Your Own Adventure stories? Great question, glad you asked. It is the perfect way to show the difference between non-linearity and cybertext. Cybertext is ergodic literature, and ergodic comes from the Greek words ergon and hodos, meaning work and path. Meaning that you, as an audience member, must put in work and effort into finding the path that will lead you to the rest of the story. When you're reading a Choose Your Own Adventure book, the work is flipping the page. It's not really work. But with something like the I Ching, there are many steps that you have to follow before you can even get to the point of reading words on a page. Arsith's work was also vital in disarming and stopping critics from dismissing these stories and not giving them the respect they deserve. It gives creators such as myself an arsenal of tools and language in order to justify these stories, especially academically. It has not just helped me feel more assured as an artist, but it makes me feel like I can explain this, and not only can I explain it, it has such a strong foundation that I can stand on, which with the chaoticness of these projects is quite hard to find, so I applaud him for creating such a strong foundation for this world. When discussing the misunderstandings between literary critics and ergodic literature, he just has such a beautiful way of describing these works, and how they form a unique relationship with not just the reader, but with the space they inhabit. Why is this so difficult to see? Why is the variable expression of the nonlinear text so easily mistaken for the semantic ambiguity of linear text? The answer, or at least one answer, can be found in a certain rhetorical model used by literary theory. I refer to the idea of narrative text as a labyrinth, a game, or an imaginary world in which the reader can explore at will, get lost, discover secret paths, play around, follow the rules, and so on. The problem with these powerful metaphors, when they begin to affect the critic's perspective and judgment, is that they enable a systemic misrepresentation of the relationship between the narrative text and reader, a spatiodynamic fallacy where narrative is not perceived as the presentation of the world, but rather as the world itself. In other words, there is a short circuit between signifier and signified, a suspension of difference that projects an objective level beyond text, a primary metaphysical structure that generates both textual sign and our understanding of it, rather than the other way around. I personally had to reread this a few times before fully understanding it, so let's break it down bit by bit. First of all, he's defending the integrity of these projects. Most people might watch a movie or TV show and say, yeah, it was good, but the story is what I take away from it. I don't take away the fact that it's a book or a movie. So therefore, the medium must not be inherent to the story. I wouldn't go as far as to say they are 100% wrong, but every decision in art should be intentional. And also, that's an argument that can really only be made when discussing linear mediums like books and movies, because when you are playing a video game, a large part of the story is, in fact, how it unfolds within the narrative. That is cybertext, the work put in, and that is a different structure than linear mediums. It's a different way of telling stories, and what Arsith is doing here so beautifully is that he is saying with conviction, without a shadow of a doubt, that these stories are just different. The narrative is not just something to deliver the story. The narrative is a story in and of itself. He goes on to explain how the story is constructed through the interaction between the reader and its contents. When an audience has to put the work in and has to make an effort in order to unfold a story, they are creating a deeper connection. And this journey in cybertext creates a new story itself. The idea that there's some objective truth and that the narrative is just showing you that truth, showing you the story, does not ring true for cybertext at all. The story is constructed by you. Trying to know a cybertext is an investment of personal improvisation that can result in either intimacy or failure. The tensions at work in cybertext, while not incompatible with those of narrative desire, are something more, a struggle, not merely for interpretive insight, but also for narrative control. I want this text to tell my story, the story that could not be without me. This book is just stunning. It's amazing. And I never buy books of essays, but I felt that I physically had so much to say that I wanted to write it in the margins of this book. And almost every page is littered with notes and underlines, and it's just amazing. He has such a beautiful way of describing these stories as something that inhabits space, something concrete, not something in the air or something magical and mythical, which is how I would have described them prior to reading this book. He also makes it very clear that his use of the word labyrinth and other physical spaces is not metaphorical. At least, not in the ways that we have thought of previously. By the west entrance of the CIA headquarters lie 3 granite and copper slabs. If you continue down the hallway into the courtyard, you will be greeted by a shallow pool and 2 more slabs. And finally, in the northeast corner of the courtyard, there is a fountain and 2 boulders, as well as an S-shaped copper sheet. This is Kryptos, an art project by sculptor Jim Sanborn, and each of these hole punch letters contain 4 different encrypted messages. It took 2 years for someone to solve the first 3 messages, and this final part, the 4th section, has remained unsolved since 1990. Once decrypted, the text says, "Between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion. It was totally invisible. How is that possible? I used the Earth's magnetic field X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there, somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38:57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north, 70 seconds degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. X, layer 2. Slowly, desperately, slowly, the remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. And then widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker. But presently details of the room within emerged from the mist. X. Can you see anything, Q? You should all go and watch Lemino's video on Kryptos because it's incredible. It's not too long and it breaks down really effectively the different methods of encryption used. But for my video, there are 4 important ones that we need to know, and that is the plain text, the ciphertext, the visioneer table, and the key stream. The plain text is what I just read out loud. It is the secret message. And on the left side of Kryptos is the ciphertext. The ciphertext being the encrypted version of the plain text. And then finally, on the right side of the Kryptos, we have the visioneer table. A visioneer table is essentially just a charted alphabet where you use the plain text, aka your secret message, as well as a key stream, which is the word that will unlock it, and you find their intersection within this table. This will then give you the ciphertext, aka the secret message, now encrypted through 2 layers, the visioneer table and the key stream. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, our secret message that we want to encrypt is the word confused, and the key stream is sunshine. So you're going to go to the first column of your visionaire table and find the C for confused. Then you're going to go to your second column and find S for sunshine. The intersection of these 2 points is the first letter of your ciphertext. So this is the very basics of a visionaire table. Again, go and watch Lemino's video for a full breakdown. It is extremely entertaining for being about something so technical. However, Kryptos was not actually solved by finding the key stream. Instead, the decoders actually found problems and flaws within the encryption itself. For example, they used frequency analysis, which is when you tally up the amount of times any individual letter shows up within the ciphertext. You can assume that the letters that show up the most are the most common letters used in the English language, E, T, H, A, versus if a letter comes up 10 times in your secret message, you can assume that it probably is not the letter Q, X, or Z. This actually was not the intended way to solve Kryptos according to some of the people that helped encode it. It's still unknown exactly how we were supposed to solve it, but some major clues exist in the granite and copper slabs that I mentioned at the west entrance. Each of the slabs are ingrained with Morse code, which reads E, virtually E, invisible. Digital E, interpretation. E, shadow E, forces E. Lucid E, memory E. T is your position. SOS and RQ. The phrase totally invisible exists in the Morse code, and within the plain text of Kryptos 2, the second section of the sculpture, we have virtually invisible. When you take the first 4 and the last 4 letters of both of these terms and combine them, you get Ani Invi, which then, when used as the key stream, allows you to solve Kryptos. Again, please go and watch Lemino's video, because I am just fighting myself. This shit is so complicated and so intricate, and because I've only explained how half of it works, it just kind of sounds like crazy ramblings. But the bottom line is that these sculptures within Kryptos speak to each other. The Morse code on the slabs give us the answer to the S-shaped encrypted text. The fact that 3 of the 4 sections of Kryptos have been solved is a testament to the CIA's intelligence and their ability to decrypt messages. But I think that the reason that the 4th one remains unsolved is because they are not taking everything that the sculpture has to offer into account, because they are not artists. While researching Kryptos, I've heard very little people talk about what that text actually means. The metaphors inside of the plain text, and using that to help solve Kryptos. It all revolves around the practicals and the technologies of decryption. And listen, in this world that we live in, I think if a computer could have solved Kryptos, if the answer was truly just in decryption, it would have been solved by now. I think the answer lies in artists. And I think I'm delusional, but I think if you gave me unrestricted access to the CIA headquarters and a notebook, I could get it solved pretty fucking quickly, because I know that the answer has something to do with the way that the light, it reflects the letters. And now he's auctioning off the 4th part of Kryptos, the answer to the encryption, because he knows that nobody is going to get it. But I could, Jim Sanborn, I could. But the reason that I bring up Kryptos is because I believe that it is a brilliant way of showing cybertext. In order to fully understand Kryptos, you have to explore and understand it on multiple levels and put in a shit ton of work to solve it. You need to physically move from the courtyard to the entrance to the courtyard to the west entrance to the manhole cover that compass is pointing at, didn't even get to that part, in order to solve it. And this is what I believe Arseth means when he says that traveling through cybertext is not metaphorical. The literary critic uses the word labyrinth, game, and world as metaphors
in their analysis of unicrucial works.
But that rhetoric seems to have blinded them to the existence of multi-causal literary structures and to the possibility that the concept of labyrinth in their post-Renaissance rendition might have more analytical accuracy in a connection with text than the function as game worlds or labyrinths in a literal sense. And what I find even more potent here is that it's at the CIA headquarters. I cannot go there and observe Kryptos for myself. I have to experience and physically travel this sculpture all online. The internet is the only way that I have access to Kryptos, translating the literal space of the CIA headquarters into ones and zeros. Such a system is not a model or representation of something else. It is itself. A cybernetic entity that communicates with all and answers to no one. This is why the internet is home for so many of these projects, because it allows them to exist freely and, most importantly, does not confine art to a linear medium. Its format allows for true non-linearity to exist. Linear mediums reduce the shape of text to a given. This is why it is so important for us to continue to push for art, to expand what our idea of a story can encompass and how we can deliver it narratively. If these texts redefine literature by expanding our notion of it, and I believe they do, then they must also redefine what is literary. And therefore, they cannot be measured by an old, unmodified aesthetics. We should at least try to be aware of its strong magnetic field as we approach the wider spaces, the final frontiers of textuality.
What's your favorite idea?
ARGs, for those who are unfamiliar, is an alternative reality game which mixes real-world elements with traditional gameplay. Something inside of the source material will lead you to places outside of the source material. So, for example, a YouTube video might have a link or a barcode at the end of it, and that link will lead you to a website which might have an audio file which leads you to somewhere else. It's picking up on lots of different puzzle pieces and clues along the way, and hopefully these puzzle pieces will reveal what the meaning of the source material is. It's essentially like an internet scavenger hunt. ARGs have often been used as a form of viral marketing, and while these projects hold a special place in my heart, I am skipping them entirely for this video, because I find that when it's used as a marketing ploy, it is often the case that the ARG itself is not the story. It just is fun and aids to the movie, but there is no story within the ARG itself. They just exist alongside the movie or TV show. You do not need to play the ARG in order to watch the movie or TV show. And that, I believe, is not valuing an ARG as its own art form, as its own way of telling stories. And that's why I believe that nicher, smaller, underground artists have picked up this way of storytelling. When these artists picked up the medium, it turned into something new. It turned into a new vehicle for storytelling. And there isn't a movie or TV show to contextualize or make sense of it, forcing the audience to stay in this world. In 2011, I was 9 years old, and a viral video called "Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared" was making its rounds. The short video itself sets up a children's TV show with puppets and a notebook singing about creativity, only to suddenly become a horror show filled with gore and an overwhelming score. This video struck such a chord with me. To this day, I can't fully say why, but I do think it has something to do with my granny showing me Watership Down when I was a kid. The creators released a new video every single year, which each video containing other clues, using links, hidden videos, dates connecting to real-life events, external media, merchandise, and so many other examples, and every single thing included added to the theories of what this story could possibly mean. Now, at first, being 9 years old, I kind of didn't believe that this project was real. I didn't understand why, or I didn't think that anyone would put this amount of effort into something and use so many hidden clues just for what? What if the audience doesn't figure out that the numbers on the fucking telephone box actually lead to a secret YouTube video? Why would someone create a story so expansive and deep just to hide all of the plot points within these hidden details? And most importantly, why would any audience member go through so much effort to decrypt this? What, for a story? I thought I had just stumbled upon a group of people genuinely going through psychosis, experiencing some sort of delusions and projecting it onto this story. But as they continued to be released and as I grew up a little bit, I realized that this all was in fact intentional. And I was completely blown away and impressed with the creators' dedication and care for their story, as well as with this insanely intelligent audience that put in the effort into solving it. It was the first rabbit hole that I truly fell into, and even though I have continued to enjoy and analyze traditional media throughout my life, nothing has grasped me in the same way Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared did when I was 9 years old. The introduction to this world at such a young age, I think, rewired how I view art. With ARG projects like Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, you have to actively fight the narrative in order to get to the story. And this is something that challenged me in a way I do not think traditional media ever has been able to. ARGs take on so many different forms, and there isn't one medium that the source material tends to be. It dips into all areas of art. Because of this, I wanted to go over some ARGs that have different ways of delivering the story and use different mediums. I want to try to show you, for people that don't know, just how much variety there is in this world. To start, we're going to look at Omega Mart by Meow Wolf, which is a popular art installation located just off of the Vegas Strip. It's a large fake grocery store. The products are very Lovecraftian. You can buy bottled bog water, cereal with spiders in it, dehydrated water, as well as a raw chicken covered in tattoos. But Omega Mart does so much more than just intriguing products and merchandise. Similar to Sleep No More, every part of the physical installation adds to a story. Hidden doors and secret rooms, clues within the products themselves, and even the staff can all give the audience insight into the story of Omega Mart. As far as the story itself goes, I won't be giving any spoilers, so I'd highly recommend you go and look at it. Now, of course, not all of you can just go to the Vegas Strip, but luckily a lot of the story of Omega Mart actually exists online. Omega Mart has two primary websites, one being owned by Meow Wolf, which is actually where you can get tickets, see reviews, and look at other installations that they've created. But the other website is a fictional website which exists within the Omega Mart universe. In the bottom right corner of the website, it says, "Not powered by Meow Wolf," in order to make this explicit. And it is in this website where all of the secrets can be revealed on what is happening with this store. The next project I want to talk about is Year Zero, a 2007 album from 9 Inch Nails. Now, in my opinion, music is one of the most divine art forms of storytelling. Like, it's one of the closest to spirituality, what might be called heaven. Albums and songs for decades have told intricate, detailed stories, but Year Zero takes it to a brand new level. Before the album came out, the band created and constructed one of the most complex and layered ARGs I have ever seen. For context, in my notes, I have a long list of the practicals of this project that is extremely stripped down to just my favorite parts of it, and it is about 3,000 words. Extremely stripped down. I don't have time to go into all the details of this project, but please go and look at it on your own time. Even if you're not a fan of 9 Inch Nails, it is incredible at storytelling. One thing that Year Zero did that I have never seen any other ARG do on the same level is the in-person element. I believe the first hint dropped in the Year Zero ARG was hidden within a merchandise piece, a tour shirt with certain letters highlighted on it, which spelled out a website. On the website, you were able to find bits of hidden code, numbers, and an email address that you can contact. There are too many websites and little points within Year Zero to properly cover here, but just know that every website contained a different puzzle piece. One of the biggest clues given to fans was in USB drives that the band would hide in certain bathrooms and places in their concerts and listening parties. All of this ended in a final secret meeting where everybody there was put onto a van and driven to an undisclosed location, just in case you need further confirmation that ARG fans are some of the most die-hard weirdo freaks out there. Just know that if I hadn't have been 5 years old in 2007, I also would have gotten onto this van.
This age is like sour milk. I mean, if I had to literally, when I got done reading this, I thought to myself, okay, this is like, this is if they tried to make a superhero out of a school shooter, is what it sounds like to me.
Creepypastas are what I and most people would consider the genesis of internet horror as we know it today. Remember back in the early 2010s when someone would email you or text you a long message, a description about an evil curse and it will find you, and you have to forward this message to 10 people, otherwise the demon's gonna get ya, yeah. Those are called copypastas, and although I don't know if I would say that each one is a full-fledged artistic story, they certainly were one of the first things to innovate this way of telling stories. It was one of the first things that really embraced this new medium of the internet. Where you used to have to go to the cinema set on seeing a horror movie, buy a ticket, and then watch the movie, now the horror is breaking into your house, into your inbox, whether you like it or not. The call is coming from the same IP address. From there on, copypastas evolved, and they started to quickly become internet memes and jokes, but that horror and terror that they invoked in people gave way to creepypastas. Those email chains were probably a lot of people's first interaction with a cognito hazard, which was previously really only known among horror fans, or they're presented as a thought experiment, which means that you would actively be ready to hear them and search them out. One way or another, you signed up to hear this, but when it comes into your email box when you're not expecting it, it hits you when your guard is down. And even though you know you're not actually cursed, there's something deep down inside of you that says, forward it to 10 people just in case. It kind of reminds me of the concept behind Nathan Fielder and Benny Safdie's TV show The Curse, where a young girl says to Nathan, "I curse you," and then whenever something goes wrong in his life, that knowledge of a curse stays watching him over his shoulder. That maybe if you had forwarded that message to 10 people, your pasta wouldn't be missing its chicken.
Taking chicken out of dinners? Because we were missing chicken from our dinner the day you said that.
That's funny.
I wanted to take this moment to share a fun story about my mom's first time interacting with an internet-style cognito hazard. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon. I was watching one of Wendigoon's iceberg videos, of course, when the solar plexus clown glider came up on screen. My mom, being spiritual, saw solar plexus and asked me to explain what it is. I explained to her that this photo is cursed, and that by looking at it, he has found his way into your mind. You've seen his face. You've heard his name. There's no stopping it. He infiltrates the weak points of your mind and slowly deteriorates your solar plexus. There is no stopping this. He is in your mind every time you write his name, every time you see this picture, every time you think of him, he gets stronger. And you can't forward this to 10 people to get rid of it. He's staying with you forever. Needless to say, this thoroughly scared the shit out of my mother, and she comes back 2 minutes later with a thing of sage cleansing the house of negative energies. But I bring up this example to show you that it doesn't have to be the most complex or the best written story or even the scariest story you have ever heard for it to really stay in your mind, for it to stick. This stuff terrifies you on a deeper level than horror movies ever could. In fact, after I listened to this, I actually listened to 528 hertz in order to reset my solar plexus. Sorry, I'm also spiritual. In fact, I'm gonna do that now because I just said his name a lot. The next development lives at the intersection of this terror and technological advances. This blurring the lines between reality and fiction is now a staple in internet horror. Almost all of the stories are presented as truth. Places like r/no-sleep have whole communities dedicated to LARPing as if these stories were real, or using real-world events to cement these stories in a place that feels true. And places like r/no-sleep have extensive rules on what you can and cannot submit, as well as how you interact with each project, ensuring the consistency of the lore and the canon, as well as the integrity of the shared universe. And the community continued to push the boundaries, making fake accounts to make it seem more real, leading to places outside of the Reddit community to build a bigger world. This is the real birth of ARGs. While the stories use multimedia and innovative ways to tell the story, these stories are nothing without the audience. Audience participation was necessary from the beginning, whether or not that was copying and pasting something, leaving a comment, or making 20 Reddit accounts to corroborate your own fake story. Audience participation was vital from the beginning. But more so than that, it encouraged the audiences to partake in the creative process of these works. A quick footnote I want to make is that the idea of blurring the lines between reality and fiction is something so deep and something I love so much that I'm actually creating a whole separate video essay about it that's more focused on content than narrative. So if you're interested in that, and if you've gotten to this point in the video, I'm assuming you are, please stick around.
You guys, my name is Resnick, and I'm so excited to be here. I found the secret to eternal life, and I found it on my Lapbook Pro.
One thing that I don't believe I've stressed enough is the level of which the audience will go to make sense of these stories. Believe it or not, I don't think that this point can be stressed enough. Now, to show you just how much of a crazy bitch I can be, I'm gonna go over the work of one of my favorite creators, Resnick. Resnick is a multimedia artist and comedian, and his projects are incredibly surreal and require a deep understanding of internet culture to follow. The project that launched Resnick's career was a YouTube channel called Alan Tutorials. The project lasted 3 years, and Resnick created over 60 videos using this character. The central premise was that these videos were a parody of the tutorial videos or the how-to videos that existed on YouTube. The hope is that one would naturally stumble upon these videos, not knowing of their creative origin. And once the channel started to gain traction, people realized that there was a story behind this character making the videos. And then they realized that it was an artist behind it, and Resnick got a little bit more disinterested with the project, his words, not mine. And it ended up stopping in about 2014, when the final video was published. And I kind of actually have... If you're anything like me, and anytime you see an empty room with a chair, Following the success of Alan Tutorials, Resnick started to create projects with Adult Swim, which aired on their 4 a.m. experimental channel. His first work was titled Live Forever As You Are Now in 2013, and his second in 2014 is called Unedited Footage of a Bear. Both of these projects were a parody of infomercials and advertisements that had elements of comedy, horror, and surrealism. But most importantly, during the process of creating Unedited Footage of a Bear, Resnick made a website to go with the short film. The website can be used to add more context and story to the short film, as well as further the mystery. And even though the Adult Swim producers were against it, Resnick added the URL of the website into the short film at the end. They were against the idea of him putting effort into something that people might not even go to look at. And although the website acts as a fun addition to the short film, I don't believe it adds that much context to it, meaning that you can watch the short film without going to the website. This brings me to his next project in 2016 titled This House Has People in It, which also aired at the 4 a.m. time slot with Adult Swim. The short starts with an information screen in which the family are described as subjects. Mom and dad are planning a vacation, grandma is watching TV, the son is throwing himself a birthday party in the front garden, and their daughter is sinking into the kitchen floor. Throughout the film, the parents become increasingly concerned about their daughter, but they are not surprised. It seems as though her sinking into the floor is something that has happened before. The short film ends with the daughter falling through the kitchen floor into the basement. It then cuts to a shot of everyone at the brothers' birthday party lying face down on the floor, mirroring the daughter at the beginning of the short. The short itself is highly confusing and offers the audience no answers as to what they have just seen. But greeting them at the end credits is a URL, which will lead you to AB Surveillance Solutions, a fictional security company where at the top of the page there is an option to log in. By putting in one's personal email address, you will be provided with the username 00437 and the password bedsheets. By filling in this information, you will be presented with a DOS screen. The DOS screen will prompt one to select from archives 0 through 2. 3 is also an acceptable answer, but it's not listed. This is one of the many little breadcrumbs throughout. Each option will present a portal to different archived footage. The archives contain an extra 2 hours of videos, audio files, video games, fictional TV shows about mad sculptors, and it even gives you access to the family's emails and phone conversations. It is in this material that we find the answer to what This House Has People in It is about. It is in this material that questions brought up in the short film are answered. However, it gives us way more questions than answers. There is so much content and material to unpack and weed through that fans have created a shared Word document containing everything they know about This House Has People in It. It is over 72 pages long, and I have read it many times. Each media in the archive starts with a description from the fictional AB Surveillance Solutions company. The audience gaining access to these logs, it becomes their responsibility to decode them, making them the person logging and observing this family, turning the audience member into AB surveillance. You watch as this family loses their grip on reality for reasons unclear. We see them eat clay, trying to telekinetically move furniture, losing motor abilities, and excessively touching their faces. The family also has several entities inside their house. The 2 primary entities are known as Boomy and the Pink Guy. Alan Resnick himself makes a guest appearance as the sculptor in the TV show The Sculptor's Playground, which the grandmother is watching on the TV. Sculptor's Playground has a website separate from AB Surveillance Solutions, and the sculptor describes a mysterious disease known as lynx. The sculptor describes lynx as a deadly, highly contagious disease that can easily be spread through clay. The family has many symptoms of lynx disease, like losing motor abilities and passing through solid objects. This is what happens to the daughter when she falls through the floor. However, the sculptor also admits that lynx disease is one of the mind. It causes delusions that highly affect the inflicted's mental state. But how is this possible if she physically fell through the floor? The working theory is that lynx becomes real when you believe in it, and this family believes in lynx so much that their daughter passes through the floor. This House Has People in It presents a world not rooted in reality, where belief becomes truth, where fiction becomes truth. This family does not look at the truth. Instead, they push everything that's wrong with them onto lynx disease, because it's easier than looking at and working through your real problems. Luckily, though, no one does this in the real world, and we've all worked through all of our issues. Strongly held beliefs manifest into something tangible in this world. If we go back to the sculptor's playground, the sculptor says clay specifically from prison yards is full of lynx disease, prison being a confined space that you can't leave. This parallels the experience that the family has inside the house. There's even a repairman in the house who seemingly is not a family member, just an innocent victim, completely caught in the crossfire of this family. That is how easy one can be influenced by this mythical disease of the mind. The 2 entities that haunt this family are 2 of the biggest metaphorical literary devices in This House Has People in It, while also being 2 of the biggest mysteries of the story. The most popular theory is that the family friend is a personification of links and the issues that exist within the family, like death, their past families, and generational trauma. The family friend lives inside the family's house and it wears the son's bedsheets. Bedsheets being the password for AB surveillance solutions. Its face is bright pink and it always has its mouth agape. It's an ever-present figure. The family does not address this entity. They suppress and ignore it as best they can. This, of course, only makes this entity more prominent. The second entity is Boomy, a representation of issues that exist outside of the family, capitalism, disease, etc. Boomy is like this universe's Sonic. He is a character from a fictional video game that the son plays in the show. The son is a big fan of Boomy, and the father even refers to Boomy as the boy's imaginary friend. But he is a real entity. He is often seen in quick flashes running around the neighborhood. He occasionally invades the house to hide or search for food or clay. To me, Boomy, being a fictional character as well as being referred to as an imaginary friend, being seen in video games as well as the real world, is the biggest example of this family blurring the lines between reality and fiction. The rabbit hole of this house's people in it is never ending. Let me say that again, and you need to know I am not exaggerating or being ironic in any way. It is never ending. The more you dig, the more you can uncover. This, what I've just described, merely scratches the surface. The 74-page document I talked about also just scratches the surface of what you can find in this world. This story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more the family believes in links, the more real it becomes. The story of this family is a cycle that feeds on itself, and not only do the characters have this dynamic, but the audience does too. There is so much information to sift through, some of which have very clear metaphorical meanings, and others seemingly have none. The goal here is to pull the audience members into this story so much that their own perception of reality and fiction starts to blur, effectively giving the audience members Link's disease. So the question becomes, are we as the audience members being objective? Or are we just sifting through so much story and so much that we are creating our own meanings and narratives out of this because we cannot fathom, we cannot deal with this idea of chaos? In order to make sense of this piece, it is vital that the audience members continuously question their own bias and their ability to draw conclusions from seemingly random events. The disease name, after all, is links. And in order to traverse through the story, you have to click on link after link after link after link, diving deeper and deeper and deeper into the story. And not a single one of these links provides you with a straightforward answer. It drives you crazy, so fucking crazy, that I might run through a wall if I believed I could pass through it. Now, to get back to the real reason you're here. Shapes. What is the shape of this house has people in it? It's certainly not circular like Eternal Sunshine or Story of Your Life. It's definitely not tree-like like Bandersnatch, and it's certainly a little bit more complicated than a web-like structure like Sleep No More. Instead, the story and the answer to the metaphors exists in layers and layers of obstacles, placing doubt into the viewer's mind. Now, why would Resnick create a story like this? Why would anybody put their audience in a position where most of them will not understand or even experience the full story? To answer this, I'm going to quote Felix Barrett of Sleep No More.
There's a whole layer of narrative that's waiting for you. We want to sort of reward the curious.
It rewards the curious. These stories are made for people who will fully submerge themselves in a work, and the way to do that is to be extreme, to make it so that they have to live in this world, to make the art so intense that being passive is not an option. But there is a huge difference between Sleep No More and This House's people in it, I feel the need to point out. Sleep No More has such an expansive story that there is no way for any one audience member to fully conceptualize and to understand and to see every single part of the story, whereas the story of This House's people in it is finite. You can see all of the story, but the confusion still remains. It challenges the viewer's idea of narrative. and pushes to see just how far they're willing to go to dissect a story. Sleep No More is the search for story, but This House Has People in It is the search for sense. The audience finds a story through our natural ability of pattern recognition and not our ability to understand metaphors. Humans have been observing patterns in our universe for as long as we can remember. When observing weather patterns, Edward Lorenz laid the foundation for what would later be known as the Lorenz system or chaos theory. Lorenz found that even the smallest change in initial conditions can change cloud formation drastically. Most are familiar with this idea through the butterfly effect, the idea that a butterfly could flap its wings in Hawaii and it might result in a tornado in Brazil. However, contrary to what many people believe, the butterfly effect is not an examination of cause and effect, but rather, when does disorder become order? Essentially, he solidified the idea that we can only make weather predictions up to a certain point before conditions beyond our control or observation take effect. Chaos theory can also be seen through graphs and mathematical observation. So here's a graph of chaos theory. We have 2 points that have a very sensitive dependency on initial conditions, meaning that these 2 points may start together in the same place. We cannot even see with our human eyes or intelligence where they deviate, but they start in seemingly the same place. As they move through the shape, they'll start together before quickly separating from one another. And the growth between these 2 points is exponential. It is not a monotonic exponential growth, but an average exponential growth, meaning that they don't continue to stray further and further away from each other, but they stray away and come back together multiple times. And chaos theory and the butterfly effect has been used as a literary device before, using something like Hamlet as a great example of the butterfly effect. Hamlet has little to no agency in the play. It's a big part of his character. So rather than seeing a case of cause and effect, we actually see a case of the butterfly theory, the metaphorical butterfly being the death of his father, which is substantial, but a butterfly nonetheless. The death of his father subtly leads to the death of every major character in the play, as well as the fall of the monarchy of Norway. When considering Hamlet as a prominent example of chaos theory, I ran into the same problem I had with our first 2 chapters, which is, say it with me, Hamlet is confined to a linear medium. The story is an example of the butterfly effect, but its narrative stays linear. It follows the 3-act structure in the hero's journey, and while it's important to note that the butterfly effect is only a small part of chaos theory, it is the only part that has been actively integrated into literature. But when we apply chaos theory to This House Has People in It, we can see that it goes way beyond a literary device, because the narrative of This House Has People in It is non-linear. When the narrative isn't confined to a linear medium, it throws us right back to the same question I've been asking this whole video essay. What is the shape of an ARG? What is the shape of this narrative?
But before that, I do have to confess something. I have to issue an apology. The last however many 15 minutes of this video, me explaining the plot and the story of This House Has People in It, it's all fake news. There is no leading theory of This House Has People in It. The version I have just presented of This House Has People in It is just my favorite version. I have a bias. I like to analyze character dynamics and families in movies and TV shows. But this theory doesn't even begin to answer half of the questions This House Has People in It brings up. You can try to make sense of This House Has People in It, but your best bet is always going to be a guess. In the fan document, there are still so many questions that have gone unanswered. And there are so many theories ranging from military surveillance, drug testing, a metaphor for capitalism, fake news, or mental illness, and yet 10 years later, not one theory encompasses all parts, all questions that This House Has People in It has asked. every single theory ignores major puzzle pieces given to us in the story. The audience is desperate to find an answer to make sense of all of this chaos, and therefore, any theory made about this house has people in it is valid in its own right. It's in its own way correct. And I just wanted to add that this is actually perpetuated by the creator, Alan Resnick. He's very careful in interviews to straight up avoid any questions trying to reveal the true meaning of his work. He loves to throw a wrench in the works and keep up this fucking act that the missing R in the birthday banner was a continuity error. I know what you are. So let's go back to shapes by looking at a Lorenz system in action. So if we can imagine every starting point of the chaos system as a different element of this house has people in it, whether that be the short film itself, the multiple websites, the order in which you watch them, the emails, the sculptor's playground, and even each individual audience member's bias. So imagine all of these points start together with only an epsilon of difference between them. As we start watching the story, it makes sense, but as we start to try to dive deeper into the themes, the points start to spread and grow apart from one another before coming together again. These are moments of clarity, moments in which our theories start to line up before they separate again. The shape of chaos theory mirrors what the audience experiences as they are watching this house has people in it. And what is a narrative if not that? Now let's zoom out even more to every other ARG. Every single ARG has multiple theories as to what it could mean, because it gives you so much material, which means that you cannot pin them down into one narrative. The narrative exists solely within the audience and their construction of the story in their subconscious. More than any other medium, ARGs are stories that are alive. Now, could all of this just be a cope? That I don't actually know the true meaning of this house's people in it and probably never will? Yeah.
This is giving spring break!
Roblox is one of the biggest gaming platforms right now with over 85 million daily users, and Dress To Impress is one of the most popular games on the platform. I personally adore this game, and it's kind of exactly what you'd expect from a dress-up game. You run around the lobby, pick up different clothes and objects from the racks, pick the color and pattern, you can customize your hair, and you can also paint your nails. Now, I'm not exactly sure as to why Dress To Impress made such a big cultural impact for a dress-up game. The best I can give you is that it has very trendy clothes and they constantly update it with new items. Each update will bring new clothes, different patterns, new ways to do your hair, as well as run-of-the-mill bug fixes, but the April Fool's Day update in 2024 changed everything. A target list of the game developers and all of the players, as well as an entry describing her hatred for the game, it painted a bleak picture of what to come next. The next update comes and her diary has been moved. It's hidden behind her desk now, saying that they have replaced her and a plea to find her with a user ID. The user ID reveals her name, Lana, but the account also brings players to a new video game as well as a YouTube channel. The Lana story takes the player down a rabbit hole full of puzzles to solve. The players navigate different games, hidden rooms, and live experiences, having to solve Caesar ciphers, translate binary codes, and find connections to Greek mythology, all revealing a story of cults, sacrifices, kidnapping, and manipulation. I have always felt as though ARGs speak to something extremely primal in us, specifically our need for connection and community as well as our pattern recognition skills. Now, we developed our pattern recognition skills out of pure survival need, but now we use them to solve puzzles. And when a puzzle is presented, that triggers that part of you that wants to solve it. But when a puzzle demands to be remained unsolved, that hits something much deeper. So even though you might use your pattern recognition skills to see the story, you go down the rabbit hole in search of understanding. And that is a large reason behind the communities of each of these projects. These projects are not passive, not easily solvable, and they are certainly not able to be solved by one person alone. They only thrive when community is involved, when people work together. And what I found most surprising about the Dress to Impress of it all was that this was the last place I expected to find a hidden ARG. I would have never imagined that the Venn diagram of people that want to play dress-up games and people that want to solve Caesar ciphers were one and the same, but it is. I mean, I was beyond shocked to see bleach blonde girls in Lululemon actively engaging with this story, and although it might not be gory, there are certainly many parts of the story that are hard to watch and off-putting, and I mean that as a compliment to the writer. I thought that this kind of stuff would turn the casual Dress to Impress player away, but it didn't. It strengthened their love of the game and their commitment to come back. There's a really interesting conversation to be had here about genders within ARGs, which I'll do a video essay on it. I mean, like, if you're asked. Most of the creators and the fans of ARGs tend to be men. It leans masculine. ARGs also tend to follow a more masculine story structure, which is something that I have coined the berserk effect, which is when a force of ultimate bad, the evil Nazi baby torturer rapist, is up against the epitome of good, the abused, tortured man who's just looking for love. The bottom line is that this is a masculine story structure. And even though Dress to Impress falls into this trope of an all-good Lana up against an all-evil Agamemnon, I was still shocked to see the fan base. And I hate that I was. It made me confront my own biases of why I didn't think that girls, or more feminine girly girls, would not be interested in ARGs. I have given younger female audiences infinitely less credit than they deserve. And I don't want to come across like I'm saying, wow, there's this amazing, brilliant, smart medium, and it's so good that even these dumb girls can get it. I really hope that's not how I'm coming across, but I bring it up just to say that this revelation, within me specifically, has expanded where I believe ARGs can reach. The audience is so important and integral to these stories, so for most what seems like a small shift in audience is actually huge. For now, I'm going to leave that, but Jungian analysis of Dress to Impress coming soon. I have so much more to say on this topic, but I don't want to reveal all of my secrets, so we're going to move on. My assumption is that most of the people that are playing the Lana storyline in Dress to Impress are not aware that it is an ARG. Some of them might not even know what an ARG is, and for an audience that is not the typical pool for these projects, they didn't need a period of time to get their bearing. They came in swinging. They understood inherently how to follow this story. They picked up on it immediately, like it was something they knew in their bones. There's a reason these projects call to people, and it's not just because it's mysterious or a new medium. It speaks to the deepest parts of us. We see life in these projects. The puzzle presented by an ARG is not an invitation to solve the puzzle, but an invitation to live with it. Perhaps the shape of chaos is more true to how we experience life. We may interpret time linearly, but we do not feel as though our lives are formulaic. We relate to chaos and we see how it manifests in the world around us in everyday life. Because of this, I would argue that art itself, art as we know it, is not true to the lived experience. We may see snippets of humanity in art, but we know that it's a farce. There is a suspension of disbelief. Linear-bound stories just don't speak to us the same way, and I believe this is partially because of the hero's journey being an idealistic format rather than a realistic format. Our human journey is not reminiscent of the hero's journey, no matter how much we want our lives to be idealistic and work based solely on cause and effect. We know that they are chaotic. And this is not a bad thing. Chaos is not negative in nature, for even in chaos, patterns emerge. We relate to chaos because we see our agency and our limitations in it. And this is the feeling that artists have been trying to put on paper, but just can't. They have always been confined to linear mediums. And someday soon, a new 23-year-old punk is gonna come on YouTube and blow my video essay way out the water. This will be irrelevant and outdated, and that is what I want. And that is what I hope for. These stories are meant to expand and change with time. And with that, I hope if you're watching this video in the 2030s that this is boring and outdated and bad and basic compared to what's currently out there with storytelling. That is why it is so important to properly analyze and take in these stories to inject more nuances into them. Because ARGs are the only medium that treat the audience as equal to the artist, that invites the audience to collaborate and create the story. The line between performer and player is eroding. The line in between artist and audience is gone. Thank you for watching this video, especially if you're still here at the end. I appreciate it so much. This video essay has been so long in the making and such a passion project of mine. I've been working on it since I made my dissertation back in 2023, and I've just been slowly expanding on it, and I could write this essay for the rest of my life if I could, but it has to be published eventually. I also really quickly wanted to come out and say that I made a Patreon account because there's often just so many things in my videos that I don't get a chance to get to, little thoughts, things that I had to cut out. So I wanted to have a place to put them as well as a place to continue the discussions. So each video I'm going to try to upload a free video as well as a paid video extra. So there's currently 4 videos out on my Patreon for my last 2 YouTube videos, and hopefully there will be 6 by the time that you're watching this. Thank you for watching again. It means the world. Love y'all.